Your hands are tired, your soul feels worn, chasing the day since the crack of dawn. The mirror whispers, who have you become? A shadow of light or a rising sun? Reset your mind, reset your heart, hit the switch back to...
Welcome back to another episode of the Caregiver Reset. I'm your host, Lena Suarez-Angelino, caregiver, mom, advocate, and therapist. Today, we'll be talking all about the invisible grief and the losses that no one talks about. We go through a journey of ongoing loss at a variety of milestones, and it's a grief that not a lot of people understand or even know how to name or recognize. So today, that episode is all about that. When we think about grief, we think about the grief that comes to an end. We think about the grief that is finite. There's a job loss, there's a death or a loss of a loved one, but this grief has no end. Caregivers often grieve the life that they've imagined, the routines that they once had or thought that they would have, and also any relationships that may have shifted or opportunities that may or may not be present to them now that they're a caregiver. This episode, we honor the loss and we honor both the love and the sadness, both at the same time, learning how to do both. So let's take a moment to understand and define what is ambiguous grief. Ambiguous grief is the quiet, ongoing grief that comes from losses that are unclear, evolving, and they don't have that clear ending. Caregivers need to be given permission to acknowledge that grief. I remember one time I was talking to a friend and she made mention that, she's not sure if she'll have any other children. And so she said, I'll never probably be a grandparent. My brain hadn't even gone that far to explore what it would be like for Zach to have or not have children. And that hit me, right? That came in a wave. Another time you tear up, right? Our journey hasn't taken us there that far, and we have similar age children, but I think just, I don't know if maybe being that she's raising a daughter, but it catches your breath. And that's kind of what ambiguous grief does time and time and time again. Oftentimes I'll grieve little things, or little things in a sense would trigger it or set it off in a sense. And we think about, there was a time when I went and messaged a company that was opening up, which is an inclusive play space for children. And I was so excited, right? As a parent with a child who has physical and cognitive disabilities, I get joy at seeing inclusive spaces being built and established. And I had asked if I were to go the extra mile and purchase any wheelchair covers for his wheelchair, would I be able to bring his physical wheelchair into the play spaces I recognize for sanitary reasons. And the response was kind of more or less, well, we're afraid of the material being ripped and dented. And so I had to grieve the aspect of an inclusive space isn't so inclusive after all once you start to dig deeper. And there's grief there. There's grief when and so now every time somebody posts about an inclusive event in our community, I often am the first one that says, by inclusive, do you also mean children in wheelchairs? And I recognize that not every space is going to be 100% inclusive to our family, but I know when I talk about inclusivity, I want to talk about those pieces. I want to make sure that there's inclusion in every aspect. We're considering sensory needs. We're considering physical needs. We're considering just a little bit more than what the average thrown together inclusive space, advertises, because that's not in their frame of reference, right? That's not their reference point. I also will bring full-size changing tables to events that I host. Why? Because that's what inclusion looks for us. And I grieve the future that Zachary may or may not be able to have. And not so much because of where he is, but because of where society is. And that's the biggest piece. And oftentimes, ambiguous grief, people don't understand it. Grief as a whole makes a lot of people uncomfortable. They don't know how to talk about it. They often want to make it better, make it okay. But because there's quote unquote no end in sight, it makes it really hard for people to think positive, or they want to throw positivity at you. And it's with good intention. And it's like, well, thank goodness XYZ, right? Or, well, consider this. And yeah, that it's helpful, but it also, we're not trying to take away the grief. It's important for us to honor. Oftentimes people mistake love for a child, love for the person you're caring for, your loved one, as a lack for grief, when in reality, both can be felt. Both can be felt just as strongly and simultaneously, right? At the same time. And so it's not that I'm not sad that, I don't love that I have to change diapers, and that can be a whole other conversation and episode, but I grieve every time I walk into a space, especially when they are designed for special needs families and they have baby size changing tables. We're 7, we're 100 pounds. We've stopped being able to use infant changing tables when he was probably 15 months old, if not sooner than that. And so there's a grief there because we're never considered. And anybody can use a full-size changing table, and a mom with an infant can use that full-size changing table, whereas we can't. The grief when we see that brand new playgrounds are built and there's still mulch on the ground. There's a grief there. Or the equipment is still, I've gone to places where the schoolyard has 3 to 21 year old students there, and their playground equipment, Zach doesn't fit in any of it. So all he has access to is the ramp to go up and down, and the forgotten about window spaces underneath the playground structure. There's a grief there because it makes us feel like an afterthought. It makes us feel like we are forgotten about. It makes us feel like, oh, well, it's good enough. And so many of our caregivers often feel like we have to put a smile on because the rest of society doesn't know how to hold space for our grief, doesn't know how to acknowledge it, or we don't even know how to name it. And so we're just like, oh, well, it is what it is. And I'm a firm believer that each generation of caregivers have a different battle that they are fighting for and that they are advocating for. Back in the day, it was school inclusion to begin with. Then it's, just disability rights as a whole and being acknowledged so that our loved ones weren't institutionalized. And so we each have our energy and our journey. And I firmly believe part of my caregiver journey is to advocate more and speak more about those inclusive spaces. We don't mind being the first, the ones to pave the way and be the first family of an inclusive program, of an adaptive program with a child in a wheelchair. It blows my mind that now in, 2025, almost 2026, we're still not acknowledging and recognizing that, families in wheelchairs exist, or, we accommodate. We went to a prom last year and we had to get escorted throughout the entire venue because even though we parked in handicapped spacing, the event wasn't held in the where it was wheelchair accessible once we got into the room, but we always had to adapt. We always have to modify. And I could let that ruin the night. I could let that upset me, but I've learned to be able to create that dual relationship with my grief, to hold space for, that's painful and it stinks to not be considered that way. But at the same time, I'm not going to let it consume me. And that's one of the biggest pieces. We can think about the missed milestones and get consumed with the things that our child or our loved one are no longer doing, or they've lost the ability to do, from motor, communication, your activities of daily living. I remember looking back a little bit on part of our journey where I kind of stopped taking monthly photos around 8 to 9 months old. And I thought, if any of you know me, and I'm sure most of you do, but sometimes follow through can get really hard for me. And so I just thought I was being a little lazy. I thought that, I got busy, work started to get busier. And so I thought that was the reason why I really stopped taking photos. But there was also a subconscious grief, subconscious fear that I wasn't ready to verbalize. And I wasn't seeing a lot of changes in Zach. I wasn't seeing a lot of progression. And his sister was a lot older, so we didn't really spend a lot of time around similar age children to see and compare. But you're also told, don't compare your children, right? We're trusting the guidance of our pediatrician and trusting the, we were big parents, so, physically larger. So our first pediatrician was like, oh, he's just a big Buddha baby. He's just, and while that didn't sit right, it's like, okay, well, if the pediatrician isn't concerned, maybe we don't have to be either. And it wasn't until about a year that we got early intervention involved and asked for an assessment and an evaluation. And we had gotten finally a referral to a developmental pediatrician. And from that referral, we got 11 more referrals. And talk about a whiplash. Talk about, there's also that grief of shoulda, woulda, coulda. Being able, why didn't we speak up sooner? Why didn't we fight back against the pediatrician? And again, I can live there and let that consume me. I can let every single denial from insurance consume me. And I would be lying to you if I said that it didn't affect me. It still affects me. We just got denied our second time for ABA. And this one, now I'm not as surprised. And why? Because we start to become numb. We start to explore or know other avenues, or just understand that we have to go through a process of, appealing the insurance. Maybe that's an opportunity for us to explore other therapies instead first, or continue other outpatient therapies. But that grief, if we don't know how to coexist, how we can create gratitude for that grief, it will consume us, and it will take away any hope that you can ever imagine having for yourself, but most importantly for your loved one. And so it's so important to allow both of them to heal and to breathe and honor. The grief, we want to honor what's hard. The gratitude allows us to honor what's here. These are the cards that we've been dealt. Whether the disability came as something that was onset from birth or genetically, maybe it's a disability that came on later on in life. Maybe it's a result of aging. These are the cards that we have right now. And so we can only focus so much on what we can control. And I know I'm not the first person to remind you of that. I know I'm not the first person to say, focus on what you can control. But it's true. The grief honors the hard parts in life. listen, I wish I could manage my time a lot better. And so if you have time management strategies, my other fellow caregivers, please give me them, because I forget that our wheelchair loading and unloading and car loading and unloading can take about 20 minutes. There's a grief there because I can't just get up and go. Even while I was pregnant, we didn't have any indications Zach would have any delays. It wasn't until my 9th month that I was walking in the mall and I was like, this will be the first and last time, or this will be actually the last time where I can just grab my wallet, grab my keys, grab my phone and walk out the door without a second thought. Barely have to tell my partner that I was going and just tell him out of courtesy, but I don't have to worry about who's going to watch the child, I did not savor those moments the first 8 months of pregnancy. And I wish I did, but it's honoring those parts that are hard. Again, I don't love changing diapers, but do I allow myself to get frustrated or sad every time I have to? No. I've found gratitude in the ability that he has regular bowel movements. He is able, that we can, and we have the resources to be able to change him, to be able to understand, that we have that space. We have the time to be able to do that. Is it inconvenient sometimes? Absolutely. But without that, it allows us almost a little bit more bonding. I know that sounds weird, right? Like, how am I finding gratitude in diaper changes? But, most 7-year-old parents aren't thinking of diapers anymore. They've been long gone out of diapers and potty trained and, but I at least know that this is just part of who he is right now. And if that ever changes, we welcome that, but it's also not really our priority right now. And it's being able to hold that space. It's being able to accept that both are true, and we don't have to choose between that grief, between that gratitude. And it allows us to have emotional balance, and it gives our nervous system permission to soften and be able to land a little bit and to pause instead of constantly being in survival mode. Because I remember that rage. I remember the first denial, the second denial, the third denial of our adaptive stroller. And I remember getting so outraged, and I would spend nights wailing, and, my partner would have to come rushing into the room, and he really thought somebody died because of how impacted I was allowing these external factors that were outside of my control to consume me, to keep me down, to weigh me down. And there's a lot there, because you're grieving the hardships. You're grieving the piece of, this doesn't make sense to us. Just recently, we were denied a bath chair and a car seat because insurance states it's a comfort and convenience item. Now we have a little bit more, I at least have a thicker skin now. My partner's always had a thick skin, but now I just laugh, because what else can we do? We laugh and we figure out how to appeal. We figure out other avenues, other methods, other resources in the community it doesn't mean that our child will never get those pieces of equipment. It's just, we have to rely on different resources. We have to rely on each other. And that's what it really means by finding our village, creating our village. And so when you think about your grief, I want you to just take a breath, take a pause, and repeat after me, or think to yourself, I miss, or I wish blank, right? So do I wish Zach could walk? Absolutely. And I still love that we can bring him out and about in the community, even in his wheelchair. And so seeing how you can hold those two truths. Do we wish he could walk? Absolutely. Would it make our lives easier? more than likely, right? And I know that there is a whole other side of abilities where children are eloping and running away, and that creates a lot of risk and fear. But there's, that's not our journey right now. And so but I still love that we can still bring him out into the community. So remember to honor your grief and allow it to come into waves. It'll come stronger. It'll just as strong as it comes, it can fade away as well. And so using your breath to honor and create that gratitude for it, to see where you can appreciate the moment and to not let that grief consume you, because both can be true. Thank you again for spending another time with our Caregiver Reset journey. And we are so excited to have you and so honored and blessed. And as always, we want to hear about your journey too. So whether it's related to grief or anything else as part of your journey, please share. We want to hear. Thank you.
Reset your mind.